Gym owners, let's talk about partnerships. Now, partnerships can be the absolute best thing to ever happen to your business. They're wildly successful partnerships that operate incredibly well. It can also be the absolute worst thing that you ever do for your business if you enter into a partnership from hell. Now, the reality is whether or not you have a great partnership or a partnership from hell really comes down to two things. Number one is selection, picking the person that you're going to be in bed with, right, with this particular business partnership. And thing two is essentially a prenup. It's making the difficult decisions, having foresight on what those difficult decisions are going to be, and making them while you're still in the honeymoon phase, while everyone's still happy, before stuff gets really hard. It's a lot more difficult to make great decisions when you're stressed, when you're financially struggling, right? When you've had a downturn in the business, when one partner is disenchanted with the other, or the business itself, or is making less money than we thought we were going to make, or whatever it might be, right? It's a lot easier to make the decisions when everyone's happy beforehand, rather than trying to retrofit decision making to make an unhappy partner happy and try to make the business work and still try to keep the business healthy. So let's talk about selection first. The first thing when it comes to selection, the typical mistake that you'll see with gym owners in general is basically that they'll get in business, they'll get in bed with somebody who basically has the same skill set that they do. So having like the same or similar skill sets isn't necessarily like in and of itself a reason to create a partnership from hell, right? Or a driving force of the partnership from hell, as long as the end game visions for both partners don't involve them both doing the same thing, because otherwise it's like, why are you going to be a partner with this person if they're not bringing anything kind of different to the table in comparison to what you bring to the table, right? It doesn't make sense. And so like, say that you're both great trainers, you're great at sales and marketing, and you're really good at, like, I don't know, finance or tech or whatever it might be, right? Well, the reality is, like, if both of you want to end up being, coaches in the end game, then it doesn't make sense for you to be partners. But if maybe one of you is going to take on the sales and marketing and that's going to be the role, the other one of you is going to be in fulfillment, like, that's a scenario that can work out really, really great. But you need to, as I alluded to before, make those decisions while everyone's happy and have a vision for those decisions before you get in bed with the individual. So let's talk about the decisions that you should make before you get in bed with someone, or before you decide to get in bed with someone. Thing number one is the clear, like, equity terms, right? What are you going to bring to the table, and what are you going to get in terms of equity in the business in return for that? Now, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Make sure you get your final advice from somebody who's smarter than me on this stuff. But basically, what are you bringing to the table? Whether it's money, whether it's, want to use the boots on the ground partner, want to use the financial partner, you need to make those terms clear in terms of what you're bringing to the table and then what you're going to get in return for that when it comes to equity. Now, that is a separate conversation than the next piece, which is owner compensation. Now, we can break that down realistically into two buckets. The first piece is going to be like payroll salary compensation, if you will, and that needs to be based on the work that's being done in the business. So if you're, one of the horror stories was we had actually it was a son-in-law and a father-in-law who were 50-50 partners, and the father-in-law thought that he didn't do any work in the business whatsoever. He was just kind of a money guy initially. The son-in-law was doing all the work, doing all the sales, growing everything. He was the face, he was the trainer, etc. Son-in-law was like, yeah, I need to make more money. I'm going to pay myself $4,000 a month. The father-in-law was like, cool, like, as long as you pay me $4,000 a month. It's like, oh, well, that's not super cool, and that's going to kill the business, basically. And so it was basically like kill the relationship with the father-in-law somehow, or kill the business. And it ended up having to be a difficult conversation with the father-in-law. I forget how it worked out. I honestly don't know if it did or not. This was years ago. But point being is that just because you're 50-50 partners does not mean that you get the same compensation, right? That should be based, number one, on what roles are being done in the business. So you need to have a plan for what are the roles that are going to be done in the business by each partner. What is the compensation for each of those roles? And I like to do a progression plan for that compensation, because the reality is you guys are probably going to be doing work that you're not going to be able to pay fully for up front, right? Most gyms can't hire to pay somebody just to manage when they open up. You're bootstrapped, you're signing people up, you're still doing all the coaching, et cetera, et cetera. So if you pay somebody to just like manage the gyms, there's not going to be any room for, marketing or hiring coaches or hiring an admin person or whatever it might be. And so you want to make the progression based on essentially what the normal progression for hiring in a gym might be. So if you're paying somebody on commission for sales, like, that's probably the first thing, and you might pay that up to a certain amount, and then you're going to pay the coach, right? The partner who's doing the coaching, so they'll get paid, for their coaching hours up to a certain amount, and then you might pay the guy who's doing the marketing, right? Okay, so the marketing person is going to get their salary up to this amount, and then you circle back again, right? So there's a progression, and you're going to build that out in your compensation plan, and it sort of it cycles through until you get to the point where everyone's making sort of what they should be making based on the roles that they're doing in the business. That's one bucket of owner compensation. The other bucket is profit distributions, right? Distributions from the profits of the business. And so effectively, that also needs to have its own decision-making framework that is laid out for you. And so you might say, all right, so profits of the business until we have 3 months of operating expenses are going to be put into a retained earnings account. There's no distributions until we have at least 3 months of operating expenses, and the credit cards that we use to buy the equipment are paid off, right? And then you might have another progression that's like, all right, now once we have 3 months of operating expenses, we can make a quarterly distribution of, 50% of the profits or up to 100% of the profits. That is to be made, the decision on that is to be made by a unanimous decision by partners. Frequency can be changed with a unanimous decision by partners, right? But you want to have the framework for how that decision will be made set beforehand, right? Does this decision need to be unanimous or not? Does it need to be, maybe you have multiple partners? All right, is it a 2/3 vote? Does it still need to be unanimous? You need to have those decisions made beforehand so that one partner isn't saying, oh, well, I think we should do this and blah, 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 blah. Well, great. Then you need to make your case and settle it, or you're not going to get what you want, right? And make the other partners believe that it's the best decision too. Again, the point of all this is if you can maximize the decisions that you're making while everyone's happy and in that honeymoon phase before you actually get in business, then you can, number one, you're going to end up figuring out oh yeah, I don't like the way that you're thinking about this stuff. Maybe we shouldn't be partners. Number two, it just makes it very easy to avoid the big crazy blow up conflicts later on because everyone agreed to this beforehand, right? Everyone said this was the way we're gonna make decisions. Now, other stuff really important when it comes to the operating agreement is exit stuff. So Dave Ramsey, I think, calls this his 5 Ds. I don't love everything Dave Ramsey says, but this was a useful framework for me. So I've now done a lot of these deals. You have death, disinterest, default. So basically somebody going bankrupt, divorce, and I already said death. I already said disinterest, default, divorce. Oh, he has drugs. So he has if you figure out you're doing drugs and, we get to boot you out. But basically what you're going to do is have a decision-making framework for what happens if a partner dies or a partner gets disinterested in the business or whatever it might be. And so an example of this would be setting buyout terms. Right? If your partner's married and they get divorced and they don't retain 100% equity, 100% of their equity in the business, and you don't want to be in business with crazy, then have it in your operating agreement. These are the terms. This is what happens if you happen to get divorced or either one of the partners happens to get divorced, right? It needs to be fair for everybody, for every party. And, you might say, oh, well, if you get divorced, we can buy out the remaining partner or the spouse of the partner at, a full valuation at 120 months and 3% APR, right? You can decide whatever payment plan you want to set up with minimum, maximum guardrails while you're in this kind of operating agreement discussion. Right, pre-discussion before you're getting in bed and really getting hitched to this individual. You can also have terms for evaluating the business, right? How you're going to appraise the business, determine the value of the business. So again, you want to maximize the decisions that are made while you guys are in the happy honeymoon phase. So when it comes to evaluating the business or appraising the business, determining the value of the business, one partner wants to leave and get bought out. The other partner wants to buy, him or her out. Great. You can have those terms set beforehand. You might say, all right, if we have 3 months of operating expenses in a retained earnings account, a profit account, whatever it is, then and we can afford to pay for a third party to appraise the business, give an appraisal of the business. Typically it's 3 to 10K, I think is what they say. It was the last time we Googled it. Then great, you'll pay for that outside third party, the independent third party, to give an appraisal of the business, and then you can decide whether or not you want to move forward with a buyout at that point. Or, if there's not that money, then you can set frameworks for how you're going to evaluate the business and give the business a value that you agree to, again, before you've gotten in bed with this person. And so then it's if one partner wants to get bought out, it's well, we agreed to these buyout terms, we agreed to these valuation terms beforehand. You signed the agreement, so this is what we have. And if you're grumpy about what you're having to pay to buy out your partner, it's you agreed to these terms beforehand. So, do it or not, right? So that, again, you can avoid the big blow-ups and the he said, she said, and the I'm right, you're wrong, if you can both agree to any number of terms. It's not an exhaustive list, but the biggest examples of the potential blowups tend to be centered around compensation. So both the salary-based compensation and the decision on what to do with the profits. Again, you don't want somebody coming in and saying, "Oh, well, 100% of the profits we just distribute every single month, right? We don't need any cash in the slush fund." Probably a red flag. You just don't want to be in business with that person. You want to come to terms to what happens when a partner gets divorced, or what happens when a partner is disinterested. You want to have things like first right of refusal. If one of the partners wants to go out and give somebody else, get somebody else to buy the business, right? Well, the other partner might want to have first right of refusal. Says like, oh, well, okay, if you got an offer for this that you can verify and show me, then I can match the offer. And get your shares instead, right? So you can try to keep it a 2-partner situation versus 3 if it's 2. But again, the biggest advice when it comes to partnerships is number 1, make the right decision beforehand on selection. So make sure you're selecting the right type of person to be in business with. And that is somewhat dependent on you, right? You want somebody that ideally has complementary skill sets and shares the same values and integrity and everything else that you have. Thing 2 is go through a lot of these like difficult decisions and make every decision possible before you actually decide to get in business with them, and then you get a lot better chance of number 1, making sure that you're in business with the right person, so it helps with the selection process, and number 2, avoid some of the big hang-ups and conflicts that can come down the line that turn your partnership from heaven into the partnership from hell. Hope this is helpful. Love, hugs. Talk soon.